She can't even balance her own checkbook, Your Honor. How is she supposed to manage a $40 million foundation? My uncle said it without a flicker of doubt, like he was reading the weather. He even let his voice crack a little on the word foundation, like the weight of it broke his heart. I didn't flinch. I just glanced down at the time on my phone, face down on the table, and turned it over for half a second. 9 minutes. That was all he had left before everything he'd built on top of me came down. Have you ever sat across a room from someone who looked you dead in the eye and rewrote your entire life into a sob story where you're the problem? If you know that exact feeling, that cold, quiet, floor-dropping feeling, type "I know" in the comments. I want to see how many of us made it out the other side. My uncle sat back down and adjusted his cufflinks. He'd worn the navy suit, the one with a subtle pinstripe, the one he wore when he wanted people to trust him with their money. Behind him, in the second and third rows of that little probate courtroom in downtown Hartford, were the cousins, the aunts, my mother's old book club friends who used to bring me orange slices at soccer games. He'd called all of them. Told them it was an intervention disguised as a hearing. Told them I'd been spiraling since my mom died, that I'd stopped answering calls, that I'd been making erratic financial decisions. They came to watch me fall apart. They wanted the tears. They wanted the 28-year-old who couldn't hold it together, the sad girl who needed her wise uncle to step in and save the family legacy. I gave them nothing. I sat there in a gray cardigan from a clearance rack and a pair of shoes I'd had resold twice, and I folded my hands on the table and I breathed. Slow. Even. There's a thing therapists call gray rock. You make yourself boring, flat, unreactive, a smooth stone in a river. You starve a certain kind of person of the one thing they actually feed on, which is your reaction. My uncle had been eating my reactions for 20 years. I was done setting the table for him. "Ms. Halloran," the judge said. Judge Okonkwo, a tired-looking woman in her 60s with reading glasses pushed up into her hair and another pair on her nose. "Your uncle has raised some fairly serious concerns about your capacity to serve as trustee of the Halloran Family Foundation, and frankly about your well-being. Do you want to respond?" My uncle leaned forward an inch. I saw it. I'd spent my whole childhood watching that exact lean. It was the lean he did right before he said something cruel and called it honesty. He wanted me to break right here. He needed it. If I cried, he was right. If I yelled, I was unstable. If I begged, I was incompetent. Every door in that room led back to the same room, and he'd built all of them. So I didn't walk through any of them. "I'd like to respond, Your Honor," I said. My voice came out lower and steadier than I expected. But I'd hate to interrupt. My uncle's only about halfway through the speech. He usually saves the part about my mother for the end. Somebody in the gallery made a small sound. My uncle's jaw tightened. His lawyer, a younger guy named, I think, Brennan, who'd clearly been hired more for his hair than his record, put a hand on my uncle's arm. Brennan was sweating. Not metaphorically. There was an actual sheen on his forehead under those fluorescent lights, and he kept clicking his pen, click, click, a little faster than a calm man clicks a pen. I'd noticed that tell about him 2 months earlier, the first time I sat in on a deposition pretending I didn't understand half of what was being said. Brennan knew something my uncle didn't. Brennan had seen the paperwork. And Brennan had started, somewhere around 3 weeks ago, to suspect that the paper trail did not say what my uncle had promised him it said. Let me back up. My grandfather built a small chain of hardware stores across Connecticut and western Massachusetts in the 70s and 80s. Nothing glamorous. Bags of mulch, 10-penny nails, propane refills, the smell of cut keys and sawdust. But he was relentless and he was honest, and by the time he died, he'd turned it into something real. When he passed, the bulk of it went into a family foundation, partly charity, partly a trust to take care of the family. $41 million, give or take a market swing. My mother was the trustee, calm, methodical, a former CPA who could read a balance sheet like a bedtime story. She ran it cleanly for 11 years. Then she got sick. Pancreatic. Fast. And in the last terrible months when she could barely keep her eyes open through the morphine, my uncle, her younger brother, became very, very helpful. He came around with soup. He drove her to appointments. I'd have gladly driven her to myself. He sat by her bed and held her hand, and somewhere in there, he slid a stack of papers in front of her and told her they were just continuity documents in case the worst happened. She was dying. She trusted her little brother. She signed. She died in March. The funeral was a gray, sleeting Tuesday. And before the casseroles in my fridge had gone bad, my uncle had a copy of those continuity documents couriered to me with a sticky note that said, in his big, looping hand, "Don't worry about any of this. I've got it handled." What he had handled was making himself co-trustee with broad discretionary authority over the foundation's primary disbursement account. What he had handled was a clause, buried on page 9, that led a co-trustee petition to have the other trustee declared incapacitated and removed. What he had handled was me. He thought I was an art teacher who couldn't read a contract. That's the part he got most wrong. I taught middle school art for 4 years. That's true, and I loved it. But before that, I'd done 2 years as a fraud analyst at an insurance company in Boston, the unglamorous job my mother got me through a friend, the job I quit because I hated the cubicle and the gray and the way fraud made me feel about people. I knew how to read a transaction log. I knew how to follow money. I knew what it looked like when someone tried to make a theft look like a mistake. My uncle never asked about that job. He never asked me much of anything. To him, I was background. A sad girl in clearance cardigans who took the city bus and lived in a 1-bedroom in a building with a broken buzzer. He used to say it at Thanksgiving, loud, so everyone could hear, "Lord knows what my sister's gonna do when she's gone." The kid can't even keep a houseplant alive. He didn't know the apartment was a choice. He didn't know that while he was leasing a new BMW every 2 years and renovating his lake house, I'd been quietly moving money. My own money. The modest inheritance my mother left me directly, separate from the foundation, into index funds and a high-yield account and, eventually, into something much more specific. He thought I took the bus because I couldn't afford a car. The truth is, I took the bus because every dollar I didn't spend on a car was a dollar going into the slow, patient thing I was building. He looked at my life and saw failure. I looked at my life and saw a stakeout. "Ms. Halloran?" Judge Okonkwo prompted. "I asked if you'd like to respond." "I would, Your Honor." "Please, let him finish." "I think it matters that the record reflects exactly what he's claiming." The judge's eyebrows went up a 1/4 inch, but she nodded at my uncle. "Mr. Whitfield, anything further?" My uncle stood again, smoothing the front of his jacket. And he went for the throat, the way he always did, because he didn't know how to do anything halfway. "Your Honor, I don't say this lightly. My niece is not well. Since my sister passed, she's withdrawn from the entire family. She won't return calls. She's living in, I'm sorry but it's relevant, and genuine squalor in a part of the city that frankly isn't safe when she has access to resources that could set her up for life. That alone I could forgive as grief, but it's worse than grief." He let his voice drop, conspiratorial, sorrowful. "She's been letting the foundation hemorrhage money." A little ripple went through the gallery. "Over the last 14 months, he went on, more than $900,000 has left that account in transfers she cannot account for. I've tried to talk to her about it. I begged her to let me bring in a professional. She refuses. She doesn't even seem to notice." He turned just slightly to the rows of family behind him, the performance, the eternal performance. $900,000 of my father's life's work, my mother's security, our family's legacy, gone. And the trustee responsible didn't file a single report, didn't call a single bank, didn't so much as flag it. Your Honor, that is not a woman in control of her faculties. That is a woman who needs help. And I am asking this court to let me help her before there's nothing left to save. He sat. He actually had to dab the corner of his eye with his knuckle. And the worst part, the part that made my stomach turn, was how good he was. I watched my aunt, my mother's sister, a kind woman who never had a mean bone in her body, press a tissue to her mouth, and look at me with something I'd never seen her aim at me before. Doubt. Maybe even fear. Because here's the thing about a lie that's wrapped around a true fact, it's almost impossible to fight in the moment. The money was gone. $912,000 to be exact. It really had left that account in chunks. 40 here, 70 there, 90 once, over 14 months. Anyone looking at the raw statements would see exactly what he wanted them to see: a trustee asleep at the wheel, a fortune draining out through a hole nobody plugged. He was banking on the simplest assumption in the world, that no sane person would watch nearly $1 million walk out the door and do nothing. Therefore, I must not be sane. Therefore, he must step in. It's actually an elegant trap when you think about it. He used his own theft as the evidence of my incompetence. The only flaw in it was that I'd built the door he was so proud of walking through. "Ms. Halloran," the judge said, and now there was real gravity in her voice. "These are significant allegations, supported by what appear to be genuine account statements. I'll ask you directly. Are you aware of the transfers your uncle is describing, and can you account for them?" The room went still. Brennan stopped clicking his pen. My uncle leaned back, crossed his arms, and let himself smile. Just a little. He thought this was the moment I'd stutter. He thought I'd say I don't know and seal my own fate. I stood up. I didn't shuffle papers. I didn't look at the lawyer I'd hired. A quiet woman named Daisy Mbeki, who told me the night before, let them spend all their ammunition first. Don't reload until the magazine's empty. I just reached down and picked up a single navy blue folder I'd set on the table when I walked in. "I'm aware of every transfer, Your Honor," I said. "All 43 of them. I can account for every dollar. I watched each one leave the account in real time." My uncle's smile widened. "She admits it. She watched it happen and did nothing." "Your Honor, that's exactly I didn't do nothing," I said, and I let my voice cut clean across his. "I did the opposite of nothing. I just did it quietly. I walked the folder up to the bench. I didn't rush. There's a particular kind of slowness you can only move with when you already know how the story ends, because you wrote it." I set it down in front of Judge Okonkwo and stepped back. "My uncle is right about one thing," I said, turning slightly toward the gallery, toward the aunts and the cousins and the book club friends. $912,000 left that account. He's wrong about almost everything else. Starting with who took it. The judge opened the folder. I watched her eyes move down the first page, and I watched them stop, and I watched her lift them back up to me, slower than before. "Ms. Halloran, what am I looking at?" "That's a reconciliation, Your Honor." The left column is every disbursement from the Foundation's primary account over the last 14 months. The right column is where each one actually went. Not the shell names on the wire memos, but the real beneficiary account behind each one. The middle column, I said, is the originating device and IP address logged by the bank for each authorization. I let that sit for 1 second. 40 of the 43 transfers, every single one my uncle just described as a mystery, were authorized from one device, a desktop computer, on a residential connection registered to 22 Larkspur Lane in Avon, Connecticut. That's not my address, Your Honor. I turned and looked right at him. That's my uncle's home office. The color went out of his face the way water goes out of a tipped glass, all at once, from the top down. That's fabricated," he sputtered, half out of his chair. Brennan grabbed his sleeve and yanked him back down so hard the chair leg barked against the floor. "She doesn't have access to bank security logs. She couldn't possibly. I subpoenaed them," I said, 3 months ago, through counsel. The bank's compliance department certified the records. They're tabbed in the back of the folder, Exhibit C, with the custodian's affidavit. I nodded toward Daisy, who slid a second, thicker binder onto the clerk's table without a word. "And the destinations," I went on, because I wanted it all on the record, every brick, weren't random. They funneled through 2 intermediary LLCs into a single account belonging to a company called Birchwood Strategic Holdings. I looked at my uncle. "A consulting company. Incorporated in Delaware 26 months ago. The registered agent used a P.O. box, but the beneficial owner on the bank's Know Your Customer file is listed under a name I think some people in this room will recognize. I paused. It's his girlfriend's maiden name. The one he hasn't told his wife about. The gallery came apart. It wasn't loud exactly, it was a courtroom, but I heard the intake of breath, the rustle, the small horrified "oh" from my aunt, the scrape of someone shifting hard in their seat. My uncle's wife was not in the room, but his sister was, and his sister was looking at him like she'd never seen him before in her life. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time I could ever remember, my uncle had nothing to say. Judge Okonkwo raised one hand, and the room went quiet again, like she'd thrown a switch. Ms. Halloran, her voice was careful now and very level. If you had this, if you knew in real time that money was being diverted to your uncle's control, why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you freeze the account, file a report, call the police the day you saw the first transfer? You let nearly $1 million leave. Help me understand why. This was the question. The real one. The one I knew was coming because it was the same question I'd asked myself at 2 in the morning for 14 straight months, lying awake doing math on the ceiling. Because of what stopping it would have meant, Your Honor, I said. I took a breath. When I found the first transfer, it was $41,000 11 days after my mother's funeral. I did what you'd expect. I called the bank. I called a lawyer. And the lawyer told me something I didn't want to hear. She said, with that co-trustee document my mother signed on her deathbed, my uncle had a colorable claim of authority over that account. If I moved on a single $40,000 transfer, his lawyers would call it a good faith disagreement between co-trustees, a civil matter, a family squabble over money. He'd return the 40 grand, apologize, blame a misunderstanding, and the court would tell 2 grieving relatives to work it out. And then 6 months later, he'd do it again, smarter, and again. He would bleed that foundation a careful drop at a time for the rest of my mother's legacy, and every single time it would be small enough, plausible enough to stay a family matter. I looked at him. So I made a decision. I decided I wasn't going to catch him stealing $40,000. I was going to let him show me, and show the bank, and show the wire networks, and eventually show this court exactly who he was. I didn't disable any alerts. I just stopped acting on the ones meant to scare him off. I let him get comfortable. I let him get greedy. I documented every keystroke he made from that desktop in Avon. And I waited until the total he'd moved across state lines, through interstate wire transfers, into a concealed business entity, crossed the threshold where it stops being a family squabble. My voice was very quiet now, and the whole room leaned in to hear it. Because once you move that much money, that many times, across state lines, with intent to defraud, it isn't a civil matter anymore, Your Honor. It's wire fraud. It's a federal pattern. And there's no version of "I'm sorry." It was a misunderstanding that makes a federal wire fraud indictment go away. My uncle had gone gray. Not pale anymore. Gray, the color of the cardigan he'd mocked, the color of a man realizing the floor he's standing on was painted over a pit by the person he thought he was burying. I didn't lose $912,000, I said. I spent it on this, and it was worth every cent. For a second, I thought it was over. But here's the thing about my uncle that I have to give him grudgingly. He never went down on the first hit. A cornered man and a navy pinstripe is the most dangerous animal in any room because he's got nothing left but the lie he came in with. He stood up, and his voice came back, shaky at first, then steadying, finding the old grooves. Your Honor, this is theater. It's a desperate, sick performance from a clearly disturbed young woman, and I can prove it. He reached into the leather bag at his feet and pulled out a single sheet of paper, edges a little soft with age, because she's leaving out one rather important document. He handed it to the bailiff, who carried it to the bench. My uncle turned to the gallery, and I watched his confidence reinflate like something obscene. That, he said, is a written authorization, signed and notarized by my niece 16 months ago. It grants me, explicitly in her own hand, full discretionary authority to make disbursements from that account for the management and protection of family assets. Every transfer she's describing wasn't theft. It was authorized by her. She just doesn't remember signing it because he spread his hands, gentle, devastating. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you. She doesn't remember. She signs things and forgets them. She's not well. And now she's spun a paranoid fantasy about federal crimes and secret girlfriends to avoid facing the simple, sad truth. She handed me control, and then her mind started slipping, and all of this is the proof. The room shifted again. I felt it shift. I saw my cousin in the third row whisper to the cousin beside her. I saw a flicker of relief on Brennan's face. Because if that authorization was real, my whole case folded. Authorized disbursements aren't fraud. There's no federal pattern. There's just a confused woman and the uncle who tried to help her. Judge Okonkwo studied the paper. She frowned and turned it toward the light. Ms. Halloran, is this your signature? I walked closer to the bench so I could see it, though I already knew exactly what it was. I recognized it instantly. The slight forward slant, the open loop on the H. It was buried 16 months ago in a stack of estate paperwork he'd brought to my apartment one night with a bottle of wine and a story about how he just needed a few routine forms handled before tax season. I'd been 3 weeks past my mother's death. I'd been so tired I could barely see. And yes, I signed it, without reading every line. The single mistake that started this whole war. It looks like my signature, Your Honor, I said. Because it is. My uncle's eyes lit up like a slot machine. Thank you. She admits it. She authorized. That document gives you authority over one account, I said, talking over him again, calm as still water. I'm not going to argue it was forged, because it wasn't. I did sign it. You're right. I reached into my bag and pulled out the second folder, the green one. But you brought the wrong piece of paper to win this with. I handed it up. 16 months ago, you slid that authorization past me when I was too destroyed to read it. Fair enough. I've spent the time since learning to read everything. I nodded at the green folder. 3 months ago, the holding company that owns the building where your wealth management office is located, the one on Asylum Street, the one with your name on the glass, sold the underlying note, quietly. You wouldn't have gotten a notice because nothing changed about your lease. The new note holder is a small LLC out of Hartford. I let it land. I own that LLC. I own your office, Uncle. I bought it with my own money, the money you thought I was too broke to have, while you were busy stealing money you thought I was too dumb to track. He stared at me. You haven't paid rent in 2 months because the new management, which is me, never sent you an invoice. I wanted the arrears on the record. The notice of default went out this morning before you got here. I closed my bag. You walked into this courtroom planning to take control of my life. You're walking out as my delinquent tenant. His knees seemed to stop working. He sat down without meaning to, the way a coat slides off a hook. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. 2 men in unremarkable suits came in, quiet and unhurried, the way people move when they've already won. One of them had a folded set of papers in his hand. The U.S. Attorney's Office had been in contact with my lawyer for 6 weeks. The wire fraud referral, the bank certified logs, the Birchwood account records, all of it had been sitting sealed, waiting for one thing, waiting for my uncle to stand up in a court of law, under oath, and swear that those transfers were authorized by me. To swear it on the record, to commit, in front of a judge and a court reporter, to a story the federal records would prove was a lie. He'd just done it. Perjury, layered on top of the wire fraud, layered on top of the false notarization his girlfriend had stamped at her county clerk job, which, by the way, was its own separate felony, but that's a different folder. They read him his rights in that flat, courteous voice they use. My aunt was crying. My cousins were silent. The book club friends who'd come to watch me fall apart sat frozen in their pews, witnesses now to something entirely different than what they'd been promised. My uncle didn't fight. He just kept turning his head toward me as they walked him out, like he was waiting for me to take it back, to say it was a misunderstanding, to be the soft girl who always backed down to keep the peace. I didn't say anything. I just picked up my two folders, the navy and the green, and tucked them under my arm. Judge Auchincloul looked at me over both pairs of glasses. "Miss Halloran," she said, "for the record, and I don't say this often, the foundation has its trustee. Petition denied, and, off the record." She paused. "Your grandfather built something honest. It's in good hands." Outside, the sleet had stopped. Hartford in late winter is not a beautiful city, but the air was clean and cold, and it went all the way down into my lungs. And for the first time since the Gray Tuesday we put my mother in the ground, I didn't feel like I was holding my breath. I'd love to tell you I felt triumphant. I didn't, really. There's no version of this where I win. My mother is still gone, and her brother, a man she loved and trusted enough to hand her hand to on her deathbed, turned out to be exactly what I'd feared. You don't get back the years you spent being told you were the broken one. You don't get back the family dinners. Half the cousins still don't speak to me. Some of them, I've come to understand, were quietly hoping he'd win, because his version of the story let them keep liking him. But I'll tell you what I did get. I got the foundation clean and whole, with every dollar he moved recovered, and then some. Now run the way my mother ran it. Quietly, honestly, with a list of small Connecticut charities that have no idea their next grant came partly out of the price of one man's prison sentence. I got my own name back. Not the sad girl in the clearance cardigan, not the one who can't keep a houseplant alive, just me, the one who was paying attention the whole time. And I learned the thing it took me 28 years and one terrible courtroom to finally understand. People will tell you who you are for as long as you let them hold the pen. Nobody is coming to hand you your dignity across a table. You have to be quiet and patient, and you have to do your own homework when no one's clapping for it. And then, one ordinary afternoon, you stand up and take it. So if you've got someone in your life still narrating your story back to you all wrong, let them keep talking. Let them get comfortable. And in the meantime, learn to read everything they put in front of you. Then close the folder and stand up. For 14 months, I lay awake doing math on my ceiling, and the hardest number to face was never the $900,000. It was the question of who I'd become if I stooped to my uncle's level to beat him. I think that's the part most people miss when they hear this story and tell me I should have just taken the 40 grand back the first day and walked. Because the truth is, I could have. But the man who slid those papers in front of my dying mother wasn't going to be stopped by getting one transfer reversed. He was going to do it again. Smaller, smarter, for the rest of her legacy. So the real choice in front of me wasn't get the money back or let it go. It was do this clean, or don't do it at all. I chose clean. Every log was subpoenaed, certified, witnessed. I never once lied, never forged a thing, never became the liar he was already calling me. When the judge denied his petition, it wasn't because I was clever. It was because I refused to win the way he played. That distinction mattered more to me than the verdict, and I think, in the end, it's the only reason I can sleep. But staying honest wouldn't have been enough on its own. My uncle counted on me being the sad girl in the clearance cardigan who couldn't read a contract, and for a while, grief almost made me her. What saved me was the boring, unglamorous work. Learning to read a transaction log, understanding what wire fraud across state lines actually triggers, knowing the difference between a family squabble and a federal pattern. Nobody claps for you while you teach yourself that. You do it alone at midnight with cold coffee while the people who love you wonder why you've gone so quiet. And that's the third thing, the one I didn't know I had until that courtroom demanded it of me. Patience that looks like weakness from the outside. 14 months of letting a man I despised mock me at Thanksgiving, call me unstable to my own aunts, believe he was winning, and saying nothing. Sitting still while everything in me wanted to scream the truth. There were nights I almost broke and called the whole thing off. The strength wasn't in the dramatic moment when I stood up and handed over the folder. It was in all the ordinary days before it, when nobody was watching and giving up would have been so easy. So if there's someone narrating your life back to you all wrong, here's what those 14 months taught me. Don't let them goad you into becoming someone you'd be ashamed of. Do the quiet homework even when no one rewards you for it. And hold steady through the long, boring middle, because that's where these things are actually won. People will hold the pen on your story for exactly as long as you let them. One ordinary afternoon, you put your hand out and you take it back.